And in our case, from a game perspective, our team had built two games that both reached number one in like over 100 countries around the world. And we thought if we just take this game mechanic and we put a nice design on it, the third and fourth and fifth one are going to do the same thing. So we'll just keep releasing these in serial, and they're all going to be top performing games. So what did we do? We took the incredible team that built Two Dots. We took them off Two Dots, and we had them build a new product. We put new people onto Two Dots and said, just go like manage that because that already worked. We're going to go build this other thing. And we spent another year, considerably more R&D dollars, and we brought a third product to market, and it completely flopped. Hi, everyone. So my name is Paul Murphy. As mentioned, I'm a partner at Lightspeed. I think I'm rare in that you don't typically let investors talk at these things. So I snuck in through the founder creds, which I will use today, and kind of talk about my experiences. I did sort of just check it was okay, and it sounds like it's fine, given it's sort of a smaller room and the group is manageable. If people have questions, we should just sort of raise your hand and throw them up throughout. I am curious, how many of you in the room are founders? More than I expected, okay. And then how many work with founders? Good, that's most everyone. Most people end up interacting with founders in some way. So what I want to do is talk about some of my experiences. As mentioned, I've started a bunch of companies. I'm going to talk about the ones that worked. There's lots and lots of companies that did not work. I actually was a founder when I was at university. Company, we sort of started it in 1999, so right before the dot-com bust. We made it through the bust, and then we busted right after that. I was traumatized, and I went to Microsoft to recover for 7 years. And I learned a lot there. I was only supposed to be there 2 years, and I stayed 7. I then eventually went back out onto the founder journey for just under a decade or so. Started about 12 companies. As I said, most of them failed. A few of them did okay. And I want to talk about some of the lessons that I took away from that. I'm going to try to talk openly. I do have a few notes, so if you see me peeking over here, I just want to make sure I don't forget things, but I think most of it's in my head. I'll try to talk openly so I can sort of share the things that I felt I was going through as a founder, for those of you that either are going through it or are going to go through it, or if you're working with the founder. My hope is that you'll have a little bit of empathy and knowing what that founder is going through. It's a tough job, as many of you know. So let's start. What I want to do is go through 3 companies. We'll start with the first one, which is called Giphy. Hopefully, statistically, you've all used it. You may not know you've used it. It's embedded in a lot of other products like Instagram and many other sort of social apps these days. But I'll tell you just the origin story of the company. So I was at this group called BetaWorks at the time in New York City. We were probably, this was a decade ago, the most active seed investor in the New York tech ecosystem. New York tech was not a big thing back then. It was just up and coming. And we also built some companies. So we kind of brought people into the fold, and we helped them start new businesses. So, early investors in companies like Kickstarter and Tumblr, and built companies like Bitly, the URL shortener, Giphy, and other companies that I'll talk about today. I was working with this guy, Alex Chung, on something totally unrelated to Giphy. And as typically happens, Alex and his friend Jace were doing something else on the side. They had built this product called Giphy, which they thought was a funny experiment because they thought it was so difficult to find GIFs on the internet. Let's just make it a little bit easier. So they built this thing, and we were all there. It was kind of a late afternoon on a Friday. And he said, all right, we're ready to push this out there, and let's just see what happens. So I called someone at this website called Mashable, which was at the time, really kind of good for getting traffic to your consumer product or consumer websites. They wrote a little thing about it, and then within an hour, we had 30,000 people on this website, and it was not built for that, so it stopped working very quickly. The reason sort of it became a company is later that night, we sat in the room and said, okay, what do we do here? And I proposed that, why don't we pull people off a few different products at BetaWorks? Let's get you some funding, and let's get this thing back up and running, and then we'll start a company. So we agreed to do that over a few drinks on a Friday night, incorporated, we co-founded the company, and then by Monday morning, it was up and running. We had a team, we had funding. It was something that was it was probably the most interesting moment that I had as a founder, and something I think BetaWorks was actually very uniquely able to sort of help us with. Once we kind of got things going, what I thought was interesting is that the assumption that I had, having never built a company that was this successful before, it was kind of obviously already taken off. We found product market fit almost by accident, is I just assumed that things were going to get easier. And actually that was not the case. So I think first thing that I observed was we got lots of people hitting this website. I mentioned 30,000, it became millions very quickly. All the way up through to the end of the journey when right before we sold the company, there was 500 million people every day using this product. And I had just assumed that if you had that many people using a product, that there's sort of lots of options for you. You can get infinite capital, you can generate revenue selling advertising, acquisition offers left and right. And actually that wasn't true at all. Our costs were astronomical. GIFs, for those that know, are not the most efficient file format. So we were, lots of people were accessing these GIFs, some of them through APIs, and we just kept serving, all this data, and our costs just kept going up. So we went out and we said, we have to raise more money, but we couldn't raise our Series A. We went to, a couple dozen VCs, and we just were not successful. So BetaWorks did something which they're not really set up to do, is they actually funded the company. They funded the Series A off of their own balance sheet, which was something they had never done before, and it turned out to be a brilliant move financially because they got rewarded for that in the end. But it got us over that hump, and it was something that I think we know was instrumental, and we were a bit lucky that we had that support. After that, the rounds became a little bit easier. So we figured out how to optimize our costs a little bit. The traffic still continued growing. We became a top 100 website on the internet, and then all of a sudden we had lots of VCs competing to lead our Series B, and that's actually where Lightspeed came into the picture. So the firm I'm at now co-led our Series B with General Catalyst, and actually led multiple rounds after that. And I would say by the end of the journey, we ended up with just under a dozen kind of blue chip investors in the company. However, the thing that I sort of observed as we kept growing this is the gap between a company that serves hundreds of millions of consumers every day with the product and a consumer product which is actually sustainable is big. And it's not as easy as it might seem. I always obsessed about product and thought, if we can just get a product that people will use, everything else will sort of figure itself out. But again, it wasn't the case. And so the next key lesson that I sort of wrote down, and I really try to remember this whenever I'm either invested in a consumer company or building one, is that despite what people say, you actually do really need a business model and real revenue. And it's laughable because you look at companies. Who do we idolize in the consumer space? It's companies like, WhatsApp or Facebook or Instagram or even early days of Google. None of these companies had any revenue to speak of, certainly not enough, or Amazon even, to cover the cost until many years later. And so we always assume, just kick that can down the road. But those are truly the exception of the exceptions. Most great consumer businesses have a real revenue stream, and they think about their business model. And so it's something that I just take away. You don't have to solve it, but you have to think about it. Eventually that reality will hit. It might be 1, 2, 3, 10 years down the line. The second thing, or the additional thing I sort of discovered as we were building and kind of following the Giphy journey, is that it's not always easy to think through the kind of final stages of a consumer business. We had reached this sort of large scale, and we were thinking, what do we do next? Our choices were twofold. We had no real revenue to speak of, so we either built out a very large sales organization and figured out how to sell the traffic that we were generating, not entirely easy because a lot of people that were using our product were their own media properties. They would embed, our gifts within their property. So if we all of a sudden just started inserting our own ads into that stream, you can imagine there might be some objections. But there's precedent to do that. So it's something that we did think about. We would have had to raise more money, and we would have been on a much, much longer journey. And I think the bit that I felt was challenging for us is, we had built this incredible team. We had found this immediate or sort of near-term, consumer success, but we were impatient. And I think this led me to sort of the third lesson that I'd say was a key lesson with the Giphy journey, which is that the best startups are bought and not sold. And we actually got to a point where we said, you know what, we don't think we're the right group to build out 100, 200, 300 person ad sales organization. There's other companies that have already done that. We looked at the Instagram playbook, and I think Instagram is obviously an amazing business right now, but in my view, there's no way Instagram would have been the company it is today without Facebook. And it's not just the consumer audience that Facebook helped it grab, but it's actually how they discovered to monetize. For all the, whatever the critiques people might have of Facebook and Instagram, I think Facebook helped turn Instagram into a really phenomenal business. So for us, I would say we lacked that kind of long-term patience to thinking about the next 5-10 years, raising another couple $100 million to do it. So I would say, if you are in the fortunate situation where you're thinking, okay, what are our options? I would say, patience is your friend. If you want to sell your business, you're not going to be able to fully optimize the situation. And the reality is there was only 2 companies that it made sense to buy us, and one of them couldn't afford us. And so some people looked at this and said, we ended up selling the company for it was about $400 million plus a kind of retention package for the team. And a lot of people looked at that and said, for a gift website, that's crazy, too much money. And actually, from our perspective, we thought, God, Facebook got such a deal because look at the traffic that we're driving and the data that they can get from that. But the reality is, if we wanted to fully realize that, we would have had to have been more patient than we were. Now, for those that know, in the UK, the Competition Authority actually ended up blocking the deal. So we thought it was a good deal for Facebook. Turned out to be a very bad deal for Facebook because once they did the acquisition, they actually weren't allowed to integrate the company at all. So the Giphy team had to sit on their hands basically for multiple years. And eventually, it was ruled laughably anti-competitive. So they had to divest the asset for pennies of the dollar. So again, for those of us inside the company, we're sort of thinking, I don't know how this is competitive. It's a gift search engine, but that was what it was. So thankfully, that the team has sort of transitioned over to the new owner. Investors, sort of founders are all out, and everything's kind of fine. But we definitely learned a lot of lessons there. So that was, I would say, the more positive story. And you can see, I think there's a lot of challenges along the way. By the way, I'm only talking about the companies that I was part of. I'll talk about sort of some more abstract lessons that I've learned as an investor. But I didn't want to showcase any of my portfolio companies. I thought it'd be better to show my own mistakes. The second company that I'll talk about is a game studio called Dots. And this is another one that I co-founded. It was built, the initial MVP was built by my co-founder, Patrick, inspired by a Japanese artist. And he came up with the concept, and then we worked together to sort of bring it to market over a pretty short period of time. It was about 3 months in the end. We launched our MVP. It also skyrocketed, and I'm not, again, I'm not 2 for 2. I'm like, this is 2 out of many that have failed. But we got about 1 million people using the app within the first week. With no marketing. So this was in 2013, so about a decade ago. But again, unfortunately, I hadn't yet learned the Giphy lesson. So we didn't have a business model. There was a trend here. So again, if you didn't get the lesson the first time, just think about how you might make money. In our case, this was the difference between what was an okay outcome and something that could have been on the order of, in my view, Supercell or King.com type outcome. And I'll tell you why. And that, obviously the scenario of hitting sort of catching lightning in a bottle, like that is unlikely for any of us building consumer products. But it obviously does happen. When it happens, and if it happens, you just want to be prepared to sort of take advantage of that. And so you don't have to build out a robust business plan, but sort of think about it and think about what you might do if that happens. In our case, what we ended up doing is it took us about 14 months, because the first game we released, literally, it was impossible to make money from. We tried and we thought, can we just charge here? Can we do a tip jar? Can we do all these things? And we just did not. We designed it to be such a free product that it was obvious when we tried to make money from it. So we said we have to just leave that be, and we're going to build a new product. It took us 14 months to do that. We had to build up a small team to create the product. And then that one was designed to make money. And what we did was we took the mechanic of the first game, and then we layered in all the best practices from the industry. So games like Candy Crush, how they had levels and pinch points, all the things that are pretty well documented, even then were pretty well documented. Somehow, when we launched this game, it was actually even more popular than the first one. And it took off. It was one of the most downloaded apps of the year, and it was the most downloaded app of the month that we launched. That was in 2014. And we were like, awesome, like we've got the formula down. We can just keep doing this all day long. And that one was sort of off and making money. But before I get to the sort of next lesson, I'll just sort of share this quote, which I'm sure many of you have seen, bless you, which is that success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking that they can't lose. And in our case, from a game perspective, our team had built 2 games that both reached #1 in like over 100 countries around the world. And we thought if we just take this game mechanic and we put a nice design on it, the 3rd and 4th and 5th one are going to do the same thing. So we'll just keep releasing these in serial, and they're all going to be top performing games. So what did we do? We took the incredible team that built 2 Dots. We took them off 2 Dots, and we had them build a new product. We put new people onto 2 Dots and said, just go like manage that, because that already worked. We're going to go build this other thing. And we spent another year, considerably more R&D dollars, and we brought a 3rd product to market, and it completely flopped. And it looked great. On paper, it should have been better than the first 2, but it just didn't work. And so what did we end up doing? We ended up eventually, had some really good advice from one of my advisors. He said, he actually invested as an angel. He said, I didn't invest in Dots, the company. I invested in 2 Dots. I think you've got something there. Why are you ignoring it? And so we actually pivoted the company around, put everyone back on 2 Dots. And then we started, slowly but surely building up 2 Dots into becoming a really meaningful revenue driver, like 100 million a year in revenue. And ultimately that's the business that was acquired. So my lesson from that experience is not to take any level of success for granted. We did what we could. I think we did most of the right things with the first product in terms of realizing we had something special. But with the second one, it was clear that this had the capability to generate significant revenue, and yet we totally took our eye off the ball. We started looking for something that could be bigger and better, and the amount of time that we lost was the difference between us being, what could have been a really massive company and something that was, I would say, more pedestrian in terms of its outcome. So, yeah, I guess that would be the main takeaway there, which is, just sign of life as a product, especially when you're launching, is really rare. And when you find it, definitely don't take it for granted. So and by the way, if any questions, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. The third one I want to talk about is actually kind of interesting. This is a company that's still going. So when I became an investor, I joined a firm called North Zone, and they were an investor in my game studio. I was a partner with them for just over 4 years. Really incredible group of investors. Lightspeed was an investor in Giphy, and they eventually wanted to set up in Europe, so they asked me to come over and help do that. So it took a while, but I eventually decided to join Lightspeed. I had a moment where it was just over 6 months where I wasn't allowed to work because of my non-compete. So the day after, I was already itching to not be building stuff anyway. So I called 2 people that I was very close with that I thought were really talented. I said, we have 6 months. Can we build a company in 6 months? And so we got started building this thing called Catch. And we have been talking about this for years. And the simple premise of it is we personally hate meetings. I think many people don't like meetings, but we like meeting people. It's just what we don't like is waking up, looking at our calendar and just seeing a wall of meetings back to back from 8 until 6 o'clock. You sort of think, when am I going to have time to actually get anything done? So we set out starting to build this, trying to decouple meetings from a calendar. In 6 months' time, we built out the team. We raised some initial seed funding, and we started building the product. I think we did a very good job of pouring, the lessons that I talked about already, but also many other lessons that I've learned over the years and my co-founders learned into this product and company. But we haven't figured it out yet. So this company is still going. I'm still involved. I spend most of my time as an investor, but my co-founders are very much running this. So there's a couple things I think that are interesting that I'm observing now as I would say a current founder. The first one, and this has been, I think, discussed at length on the internet, but I just want to break it down a little bit, which is creating this clearly defined hypothesis to test. Our hypothesis was that people don't like meetings, and that they would go through extraordinary lengths to kind of, reduce the amount of meetings that they have in their calendar. And so we built about 5 different versions of that first product to test that hypothesis. In the end, it didn't work. We feel very confident that we built a really good product. And if you use the product, I think it saves you time, it saves you money. And if you're in a consulting business, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. People don't want to install another app, and people, as much as they like to complain about meetings in their calendar, they don't want to adjust their workflow. So I think what we liked about this was that it was a very binary conclusion. It did not work, but the premise of what we're trying to build is still valid in our view. So what I think the team has done a really good job of doing is not kind of obsessing over the vision and saying, no, we're going to build this thing. Doesn't matter. We just haven't figured it out yet. I've seen companies that I've invested in. They've been so passionate about the company, the product that they want to build, even if all signs are pointing towards this thing not working, they just keep going at it from different, slightly different directions. And I do think that's a mistake. It's, your time is so incredibly precious as a founder, and trying to, the worst thing you could do is push something that clearly people are saying they don't want to use. And then worse than that would be, well, we just don't have enough people in the product. Let's do a little bit of marketing and get some people into the product. Of all of the things that I've tried building over the years, the difference between things that work and things that might work or don't work is so stark. I'm sure many of you have seen this. There's no question. When it works, So if you're on the fence, it didn't work. Try something else, take a different turn. So we're coming at this now from a different perspective. And, I actually think, we could be onto something, but like I said, we're not going to be religious about it if it doesn't work. We'll use that runway and see if we can sort of figure it out. The next thing is, talking a little bit about the team. And I think that there's been some, as companies have been sort of glamorized, startups have been glamorized. I think there's been a lot of focus built around, or discussed around team and experience of team. And in the experiences that I've had, the companies that I've seen really take off and become, multi-billion-dollar businesses, have phenomenal outcomes, experience is good. That's more important for perhaps, the scale-up organization than it is for the founding organization. The most important thing is commitment, and I would take that any day of the week over experience. And so I think what I'm seeing, and what I love seeing with not only with Catch, but with a few of the really early stage companies that I invest in, is, you can find those members. And for those of you that are part of a founding team, but maybe are not founders, folks that are just like, look, I know that didn't work, but I'm not going to get, upset about the fact that we have to throw the product away and try something different. I'm not going to go out there and start looking for jobs because, the first, second, and third versions of this thing didn't quite nail it in the market. That's what this is all about. And that's what being on, either a founder or being on the founder journey, as a small team is. And I think you can see those people. We lost half the team once we sort of realized that first direction didn't work. The people we have left are so good, so focused, so efficient. So I think as you're building out team, or if you're part of the team, I think this is just something that I would always say, just focus on commitment. Get the missionaries, ditch the mercenaries for now. You can pick them up when you're scaling. And they, I'm not sort of being disparaging. I think those people play a really vital role in organizations, but you don't want them as part of that kind of founding team. All right, so I'm gonna keep going. Now, there's a few lessons I wanted to sort of pull out in the companies. I've invested in probably 20 companies now over the last 5 years, and I've been involved in many more that my partners have invested in. So in addition to kind of my own founder experiences, I thought I'd just pull out some of the lesser known challenges that I've observed. I think the first one, which is unfortunately just not very well known, even though it's so incredibly common, is founder breakups. And I would say I can't think of many companies that have gone through the full journey where there hasn't been at least one founder that's had to leave the business. And let me go back to the Giphy example. So when we started the company, I was CEO. Alex and Jace were my co-founders. They were doing other functions. About a month and a half in, I was no longer CEO. It was Jace. And then about 2 months later, Jace was no longer the CEO. It was Alex. Jace had stepped aside as an advisor. I stepped aside as an advisor and started building another company. And Alex was kind of left holding the bag. Like, he was just like, okay, I guess I'm going to run this thing. Now, that was really painful because we didn't design for that eventuality. And so he's like, look, I'm doing all the work now. What are you guys doing? And he was right. So we had to figure it out. And it was really complicated. It took time away from the business. It happens. I would say I actually can't think of a scenario where it hasn't happened. So the good news is there's a lot you can do to prepare for this. So if you just sort of sit down as founders, for those that are either about to start a company or maybe for your next one, because it's probably too late if you already have, is just sort of think about that prenup and what it might look like. If one of you leaves the business, think, okay, what does the business need? The biggest challenge people face is if, let's say, a co-founder and CTO leaves and you have to hire a CTO to replace them. That CTO is not going to be free. They're going to need cash and equity. Where's that going to come from? It doesn't make sense to dilute the investors and the founders that have stayed, and certainly not the employees. It should come from the departing founder. So I think you can just sort of build some of that into the framework of the company. And I wish it was, more common than not. I have to educate even today quite a few founders that we invest in on the importance of that. And our sort of situation was a productive one. Many of them are not and can get pretty nasty. Second lesson is there's this thing called a founder associate, which I wish this was around when I was, or maybe it was around, I just didn't know about it. But it's such a brilliant role. And I think it describes a really interesting characteristic of someone that can help a small founding team. Does anyone have a founder associate on their team? No. Okay. So, a couple of you do. All right, cool. So, I mean, the way that I think about it, and you may everyone probably thinks about it a little bit differently, is you get someone that is perhaps a couple of years out of school, really eager to learn, wants to probably follow in your footsteps at some point, a couple of years or longer, and they're willing to basically do anything, work 24/7 like you are as a founder, so that they can absorb everything that you're going through to make themselves smarter. If you get the right profile, the amount of work that this person can take off your plate is enormous. And I've really seen founders scale. There's one founder of the scooter company, Tier Mobility. He Lawrence hired someone in this role. It's actually a brilliant story because, and this is the perfect character to hire for this role, but he emailed Lawrence. Lawrence didn't respond. He was in California. This guy was in California. Lawrence is in Berlin. Emailed him again. He kept hounding him. Eventually sent him a note and said, I'm coming to Berlin tomorrow. I'll be outside. He came to Berlin. Lawrence is like, obviously I have to meet this guy. He met him. He was really smart, incredibly determined, brought him on, and the guy just took on so much work. And he was really, he did really well for everyone. And now he's off doing his own thing. So I'd highly recommend getting a founder associate. There's job descriptions out there. If you need help, I'm also happy to help. The next one is pretty serious point, talking about the pressure of a founder. I mean, I still have the feeling in my stomach when I go back and I think about some of the challenges that we went through. There was one moment in particular in my game studio. We did a deal with a celebrity. For whatever reason, the thing we were making just didn't work, and we told them, and their lawyers didn't take it well, even though it had nothing to do with any of us. It just didn't work. It happens a lot in gaming. And they, threatened to try to come after all the IP in the company, even though they had no claim to it. And it was just me. I mean, my co-founder is running the product and tech team, and I was stuck with this thing, and I couldn't sleep. It was really difficult to manage. And so what I ended up doing in that moment was hiring an executive coach. And I would say she was more of a therapist, if I'm honest, but she just sort of helped me work through some of those challenges that I was going through. Unfortunately, I've also seen founders, go to full extremes and actually take their own life. I mean, it's a very serious thing. So I don't think there's enough discussion about founder mental health. And what I've started doing is just taking random phone calls from founders. I just put my number out there on Twitter and we'll take calls. And, there's a lot of people struggling with this. So I'm sure some of you in the room are struggling with this. And I think the only thing I can say is find someone to talk to. Just don't keep it in. And it's shocking how many people keep it in, and they feel like it's almost, they're going to be ashamed if they talk about it. But every founder is going through it. And the more successful your company is, probably the more stressful and the more anxiety you're feeling. So all the more reason to talk to someone. I think I'm quickly running out of time. So I'll just get to the last point and then a few closing comments. When I became an investor, my eyes were completely opened into how people used me. And I realized that I had used my investors entirely the wrong way as a founder. And I looked to my investors as a group to manage. I didn't want them to be disappointed. I wanted to make sure that they knew what was going on. They weren't questioning me, that they were ready to invest if we did another round. Completely the wrong idea. I think the founders that I've seen do really well is they say, all right, you've now committed to invest in my company. That is a binary decision. You're on the team. So when you're on the team, you're going to get to work. And so they put me to work. I get phone calls on nights and weekends. If they need me to help with sales or recruiting, like I said, they put me to work. So I think I try to tell the founders that I invest in that this is how they should use me. For those of you that raise capital, use your investors. There are bad investors out there. I had a couple of them as well, and they may not want to work with you or work for you. So this is the kind of thing that you can reference before you take their capital on board. Okay, last few quick things, and I'll get off. So, running a company, we've talked about it. Starting a company is hard. Running a company is even harder. Running a successful company is even harder than that. And so I think just keep that in mind. There's a reason that founders, the successful ones, have such big outcomes, is the odds are so heavily stacked against them. And so the very few that kind of get through that journey do end up having big outcomes. There's, I think the stats are kind of interesting. So we meet with hundreds of companies a year. I mean, as a firm, we meet with thousands of companies a year. I personally meet with hundreds of companies a year, and maybe make 2 or 3 investments. So it's a pretty big funnel. But out of the venture-backed companies, there's this 1 in 10 will kind of succeed, which is, I think, broadly speaking, if you get venture capital, that's roughly true. But it's less than 0.1% of those that kind of go through that journey end up becoming a unicorn. And of the unicorns, 20% of them fail before they see any outcome. So I'm not saying this to discourage you. I'm just saying it is hard. The odds are stacked against you. You're trying to do the impossible. So, just sort of, again, keep that in mind. It's 10 times harder than becoming a professional football player. So it's a difficult work. But that's all by design. And I think that the people that are in this room that are building companies, you should be going up against the odds. So hopefully we can, if we can't partner at some point now with me as an investor, hopefully I get to see what you're working on, and you can reach out, and I'll try to be helpful in other ways. But thanks for listening. Hopefully it was useful. If any questions, I think we have a couple minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to get Anjana mic'd up, so you can get that sorted if you just want to pop in there. And if anybody does have a question, we've got time for one, and then Paul's roundtable will be at 2:45.
2:45, perfect.
So, you had your hand up.
So, what's the thing as a founder that you were surprised about when you turned to the dark side?
That's a good question to end on. The thing that I was surprised about when I moved over to investing is as an investor, it's actually pretty obvious pretty quickly if a company has, I would say the main reason that VCs don't invest in a company is because they don't see the upside. It's not because they're worried about your company going to zero. We're okay with that risk. And I wish I understood that as the founder, is upside orientation as opposed to downside protection.
Awesome.
Great. Thank you so much for
Paul.
listening.
So great to have you here.
Great.